You do not need a gym to stay fit. No workout plan, no tracker, no 30 minutes of willpower squeezed out of an exhausted day. In many Japanese households, fitness isn't a separate activity at all. It's not added onto the day. It's simply built into how the day already happens, so quietly that nobody living it would ever call it exercise. 10 habits, that's all it takes. Stay with me, because the fourth one is something almost every Western home has engineered out of daily life, and the eighth one has nothing to do with movement at all, even though it may matter just as much. After the final point, I'll give you one simple way to start tonight, without buying a single piece of equipment. This is the Japanese Reset, where we explore small Japanese ideas that can make everyday life calmer, cleaner, and more intentional. Think about how modern convenience has quietly reshaped an ordinary day. Cars replace short walks, elevators replace stairs, delivery replaces the walk to a shop. None of these changes were made with fitness in mind, and none of them feel like a decision against movement in the moment. But stacked together, day after day, they represent one of the largest, least discussed shifts in how much the human body actually moves compared to a few generations ago. The habits we're covering today aren't a workaround for that shift. They're simply what daily life looks like when convenience hasn't been allowed to quietly remove movement without anyone noticing. Let's start with the most obvious version of this, the one hiding in plain sight in how people actually get from one place to another. Habit 1. Walking as the default way to run an errand, not the exception. In a lot of Western daily life, even short trips default to a car. The pharmacy 2 blocks away, the coffee shop around the corner, all of it reached by driving, because driving is faster, and walking feels like an inconvenience worth avoiding when a car is sitting right there. People choose this because time feels scarce, and a 5-minute drive genuinely beats a 15-minute walk on paper. But here's what most people never notice. Those short walks, avoided one at a time, quietly remove hundreds of minutes of movement a month, minutes that were never going to be replaced by a scheduled workout because they never registered as missing in the first place. In many Japanese cities and towns, walking to a nearby shop, a train station, or a neighbor's house is simply the default, not a lifestyle choice. Public transit systems and dense neighborhoods are built around it, but the underlying habit, choosing to walk when a trip is genuinely walkable, applies just as well anywhere. The practical action is a simple filter. For any errand under a 15-minute walk, default to walking unless there's a real reason not to, rather than defaulting to the car and needing a reason to walk instead. Over a month, this single filter alone can restore a meaningful chunk of the movement that convenience quietly removed one short drive at a time. Calmo meaning amina. Let that idea land for a second. The difference isn't fitness versus laziness, it's which option requires a reason and which one doesn't. Habit 2. Eating until satisfied, not until full. Modern portions, especially outside the home, have grown considerably over recent decades, training most people to treat plate empty as the natural stopping point of a meal, regardless of how full they actually feel partway through. Restaurants didn't set out to change how full people feel at the end of a meal, but larger default portions have quietly reset what normal looks like on a plate. The overlooked mechanism here is simple. The signal that tells your brain you're full lags behind your stomach by several minutes, which means eating until you feel completely full often means you've already eaten well past what your body actually needed a few minutes earlier. There's a well-known Japanese eating principle, Hara roughly meaning eating until you're about 80% full. It's not a diet or a restriction rule, it's a pacing habit built around eating slowly enough to actually notice the signal before overriding it. The practical action is small: slow down the pace of your largest meal and check in partway through, asking honestly whether you're comfortably satisfied rather than automatically finishing everything in front of you. This isn't about guilt or willpower. It's about giving a signal your body was already sending enough time to actually arrive. We've covered movement and eating pace, 2 habits that touch fitness indirectly. The next one is something almost nobody thinks to count as physical activity at all, even though your body absolutely registers it as one. Habit 3, sitting low and standing back up, dozens of times a day. In much of the West, furniture is built to minimize the effort of sitting and standing. Chairs at hip height, couches with deep cushions, a body that barely has to bend to reach a seated position. Traditional Japanese seating, on low cushions or directly on tatami flooring, requires genuinely lowering the body to the ground and pushing back up again, using the legs and core in a real, if modest, functional movement, repeated every single time someone sits down or gets up. Multiplied across a day, meals, conversations, moments of rest, that's dozens of small squats, nobody ever labeled as exercise, spread naturally across hours rather than concentrated into a single dreaded set. The practical action doesn't require replacing your furniture. It's choosing to sit on the floor for part of your day, even briefly, while reading or watching something, and standing back up the way you'd stand from a low seat, deliberately using your legs rather than pushing off a high armrest. Habit 4. Active household chores, done by hand instead of engineered away. Here's the one most Western homes have specifically optimized out of daily life. Dishwashers, robot vacuums, and a long list of labor-saving devices have quietly removed dozens of small physical movements a day, bending, reaching, scrubbing, carrying, each one individually tiny, collectively significant. None of this happened maliciously. Every one of these devices was built to save time and effort, and it genuinely does. But saved effort and removed movement are the same thing, just described from two different angles. A traditional practice in many Japanese households, sometimes tied to a seasonal deep cleaning tradition called osoji, treats thorough, hands-on cleaning as a normal, recurring part of life, rather than something to be automated away entirely whenever possible. To be clear, this isn't an argument against convenience appliances. It's a simple observation. Every task automated away is also a small amount of movement quietly subtracted from the day, and that subtraction adds up in ways a single workout doesn't fully replace. A dishwasher saves minutes. It also removes the specific bending, reaching, and standing that hand washing would have required dozens of times a week without anyone consciously trading one for the other. The practical action is choosing one household task a week to do by hand instead of by machine, not out of obligation, but as a deliberate small addition of movement back into an otherwise convenience-optimized day. We've handled walking, eating pace, sitting posture, and chores, 4 habits that live inside the home. The next few move outward, into how the rest of the day is structured. Habit 5. Squatting for low tasks instead of bending at the hips. Reaching something on a low shelf, picking something up off the floor. Most people in the West default to bending forward from the hips, keeping the legs mostly straight, placing the effort almost entirely on the lower back, a pattern so automatic most people never notice they're choosing it at all. A full squat, bending at the knees and hips together, lowering the whole body rather than just folding forward, engages the legs and core far more than a simple hip hinge does, and it's a movement pattern that shows up constantly and unremarkably throughout many everyday Japanese tasks, from gardening to cooking at a low counter to simply picking something up off a tatami floor. The practical action is a small correction, not a new habit. The next time you reach for something low, squat instead of bending forward, treating it as the default rather than something you'd only do intentionally at the gym. Habit 6. An evening walk with no fitness purpose attached to it at all. For many people, a walk only happens if it's been scheduled as exercise, a specific loop, a specific time, tracked and logged. On a day without time carved out for that, the walk simply doesn't happen, and the day passes with no dedicated movement at all. Not because the person didn't care, but because the only version of walking they know how to schedule requires effort to justify. A habit called sampo, an unhurried walk often taken after a meal or in the early evening, is common throughout everyday Japanese life. It carries no pressure around distance, pace, or calories. It's closer to a pause with your legs moving than a workout, which is exactly why it tends to survive weeks that a formal fitness plan doesn't. Nobody skips sampo for not having time because it was never treated as an obligation heavy enough to skip in the first place. The practical action is removing the fitness framing entirely. A 10-minute walk after dinner, taken purely because it feels good to move after eating, without tracking it, timing it, or turning it into a goal, is far more likely to survive a busy week than a walk that has to earn its place on a schedule. We're past the halfway point. The next two habits move somewhere people rarely expect when the topic is fitness. Habit 7. Gardening, or tending something small, and living, as regular light activity. A garden, even a small one, a few pots on a balcony, a modest backyard bed, requires a steady stream of bending, kneeling, carrying, and standing back up, spread across the week rather than concentrated into one session. It's the same underlying pattern as everything else on this list: small, repeated, and never once labeled as a workout by the person doing it. This kind of activity is common throughout Japanese daily life, from small home gardens to community plots, and it's rarely framed as exercise at all. It's simply something enjoyable that happens to move the body consistently, which may be exactly why it tends to last for years in a way gym memberships often don't. The practical action doesn't require a yard. A few pots on a windowsill or balcony, tended a few minutes several times a week, produces the same small, repeated movement pattern on a much smaller scale. Habit 8. A calm baseline, because chronic stress works against a fit body in ways a workout can't undo. This one has almost nothing to do with movement directly, and everything to do with what happens when stress runs constantly in the background. It's easy to assume fitness is purely physical, a matter of moving enough and eating reasonably, and to overlook the invisible layer sitting underneath both of those things. Chronic, unmanaged stress is associated with sustained elevation of cortisol, a hormone that helps the body respond to short-term threats, but when it stays elevated for long stretches, it may contribute to increased appetite, disrupted sleep, and a harder time maintaining a healthy weight, regardless of how much someone exercises elsewhere in the week. Many of the habits already discussed today, unhurried walks, low-pressure movement, deliberate household rhythms, also happen to interrupt exactly this kind of chronic stress buildup, which means the fitness benefit and the stress benefit were never really separate to begin with. A body under constant background stress is fighting an uphill battle no amount of exercise fully offsets, which is part of why so many people can train hard and still feel like their body isn't cooperating. The practical action is small and specific. Build one short, phone-free pause into your day, a slow cup of tea, a few minutes outside, a brief walk with no destination, treating it as seriously as you'd treat a workout, because in a real sense, it's protecting the same underlying system. Habit 9. Standing and moving throughout work, not saving all movement for after it. Long, unbroken stretches of sitting during work hours are common across most modern jobs, with movement pushed entirely into evenings or weekends, if it happens at all. By the time work ends, the motivation, and often the time, for a workout has already been spent on everything else the day required. A common pattern in many Japanese workplaces includes brief, regular breaks for stretching or a short walk between tasks, rather than treating the workday as one continuous seated block. It's a small structural habit, but repeated daily, it meaningfully reduces the total hours spent motionless, without ever requiring a separate block of time to be carved out later. The practical action is standing and moving for even 1 minute every hour during work, a habit that requires no equipment and barely interrupts productivity, while meaningfully reducing the accumulated hours of stillness by the end of the day. And now, the final point, the one that ties every other habit on this list together. Habit 10. Consistency held for years, not intensity held for a few weeks. Every habit we've covered today is individually small. A short walk, a few extra squats, a cup of tea instead of a scroll. None of it looks like a fitness routine on its own, and that's precisely the point most people miss when they compare it to a gym plan. The overlooked mechanism is compounding. A habit practiced for 2 weeks barely registers. The same small habit, repeated for years, becomes a fundamental part of how a body moves and functions, often outperforming sporadic, high-intensity effort that burns out within a season. A single intense month at the gym, followed by 6 months of nothing, produces a very different long-term outcome than a decade of quietly walking to the shop instead of driving, even though the gym month feels far more impressive in the moment. The practical action is a shift in expectation rather than a new habit. Choose the smallest possible version of anything from today's list. small enough that skipping it would feel strange rather than difficult, and commit to that version specifically because it's sustainable, not because it's impressive. We've now gone through all 10 habits: walking as the default, eating until satisfied, sitting low, active chores, squatting for low tasks, unhurried evening walks, gardening, a calm stress baseline, moving during work, and consistency over intensity. Here's what most people never notice until they see the full list together. Not one of these 10 habits requires a gym, a plan, or a single minute labeled exercise. What makes them powerful is that they were never trying to be a workout in the first place. So here's a simple way to put this into practice starting tonight. Call it the one swap rule. Don't try to adopt all 10 habits at once, which is a fast way to abandon all 10 within a week. Choose exactly one small daily choice you currently default to the convenient way: driving instead of walking, bending instead of squatting, sitting through work instead of standing once an hour, and swap it deliberately for 1 week, just one. Let it become automatic, something you no longer have to consciously remember, before adding a second. A fit body isn't built by a single intense session repeated occasionally. It's built by dozens of small, ordinary choices, made so consistently they stop feeling like choices at all. Tonight, pick your one swap and make it the very next time the old default shows up. Which of these 10 habits surprised you the most? Tell me the number in the comments and I'll read through them. If this changed how you think about fitness, subscribe to the Japanese Reset for more small Japanese ideas that create meaningful, lasting change without requiring you to overhaul your entire life at once. And if you know someone who's given up on the gym one too many times, share this with them. Sometimes the most useful fitness advice has nothing to do with a gym at all. Staying fit was never only about the hour you spend working out. It's about the other 23 and what they quietly add up to.